So Dr. Wooler here for Autism Recovery 101. This is Module 2, and tonight we're going to talk about general aspects with regards to nutritional supplements, and specifically things I call supplement rules along with suggestions. These are tips and suggestions as far as implementing supplements, combining them, avoiding certain supplements with other things. And then towards the end, we're going to talk about the Autism Action Plan. This is developing your Autism Action Plan as a new parent, or perhaps you're a parent just stepping back into the fold here with regards to biomedical intervention. Some things that I think are really critical to know moving forward so that you have a good solid foundation on the information that you're going to acquire, and then observing your child, becoming a detective with regards to your child's particular condition and the unique things about them that then you can share with others, share with therapists, and certainly share with your doctor to help sort of streamline this approach for you. So pretty much I just gave an overview already of what this presentation is about. So let's just go ahead and get into it here. There are some support documents for this module. There's actually a PDF handout called General Tips and Suggestions for Supplements, and that is going to get covered, by the way, in this presentation. So, and then we have another PDF document called the Oral Flow Pill Swallowing Protocol. Now, the Oral Flow cup, I'll show that to you, is a very convenient, it's like a small little sippy cup, but it's got a long mouthpiece. And what it does is it helps to train your child to learn how to swallow capsules and tablets. The quicker you can get to the point where your child is able to swallow capsules and tablets, the easier life is going to be with regards to supplements, because you're going to get to bypass all of the concerns, or I should say some of the concerns, that could come about because of taste or texture of something. It tends to make things easier, because the reality is not every supplement comes as a gummy, not every supplement comes in a liquid, and not every supplement tastes good. So that's one of the challenges. So let's revisit this concept of biomedical intervention again. So we talked about in Module 1 the 4 pillars, right? Dietary intervention, key, central, not going to get very far if your child doesn't have a healthy diet, or identifying foods that they might be reactive to. And there's a lot of diets, I realize that. But in the beginning, it's really important to really focus on a gluten casein-free diet and try and make that diet as healthy as possible. Supplements are central as well, because we know that many kids are very self-selective in the types of foods. They can be nutrient deprived in certain levels. And so foundational supplements are very important. And then as we move into Module 3, we're going to talk about gut assessment, particularly looking at the organic acids test with regards to lab testing. And then we'll eventually move into methylation. Okay. So one thing I want to state up front, and when you're thinking about how some of these therapies work, I break these down a couple different categories, in that everything can be helpful. There's the potential of all biomedical therapy being helpful. It's just that reality is that certain therapies tend to have a greater success and higher percentage rate of being helpful. So we know that dietary intervention is very high on the list. Gluten casein-free diet is very high on the list as far as beneficial therapies for a good percentage of kids, 65, 70% or more. Basic supplements treating yeast, methyl B12, for example, are all very highly ranked therapies. Now, there also are therapies that I put in categories called immediate feedback and then long-term feedback. What I mean by that is immediate feedback therapies are things that you as a parent will typically see positive results happening fairly quickly. Okay, and that fairly quickly means sometimes within 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks on average. Improvement in eye contact, improved behavior, improved attention, better sleep, less self-stimulatory behavior, less sensory-seeking behavior. Okay, these are the main things, obviously, you're looking. And so the diets, the supplements, the treating yeast and bacteria, methylation therapy support tend to be very, on average, immediate feedback type of therapies. Now, there are long-term therapies, usually things like heavy metal detox or antiviral therapy, anti-inflammatory therapies, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, that don't typically give that immediate response that you might see that happens within a week to 2 weeks. It's not that they're not helpful, it's just that the response or the positive response is something that's seen over time. Okay? It may take a couple months for you to look back and say, we're definitely seeing a difference by doing the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, for example. Those therapies also tend to be more second and third tier types of interventions, things that you would do after you've implemented the foundations, the 4 pillars essentially of what we're talking about in this course. Now, I realize these are generalizations, not absolutes. Every child is a little bit different. That's not to say that some parents haven't reported that within a week or 2 weeks of starting hyperbaric oxygen therapy that they were seeing positive changes quite profoundly. But on average, the results tend to come in over time. The topic of supplements is or can be huge. This is a slide from an organization called TACA, Talking About Curing Autism. They've been around for a long, long time. And they put out a tremendous amount of very useful information. And this was just a slide that was really showing you the different levels or the different areas where intervention can be done from a supplement standpoint. So immune deficiencies, this is just a snapshot of different remedies that can be helpful. Sleep disorders, heavy metal toxicity, or digestive problems. Now, you could create a lecture, if not a course, on every single one of these boxes. But the focus really needs to be on creating a healthy foundation. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight, and then also really learning strategies to be able to get these supplements, whatever supplements you're using, into your child. Now, I talked about in Module 1 starter supplements, or what's called a starter packet. And this minimally, I believe, needs to include calcium, magnesium, because remember, when you go off of dairy, that for many kids is their primary source of calcium. So calcium, magnesium are important. Multi-mineral and mineral blend and a multivitamin, I should say. Those are convenient. And then cod liver oil. Okay, those tend to round out sort of the minimum that can be implemented. Well, there are other things that can be added on initially too. And sometimes people will add in a probiotic. And most of the time that's just fine. I mean, a general probiotic is like a multivitamin for the gut. It's just giving healthy levels of normal bacteria. What I recommend is that when you introduce a starter packet, and if you add on a probiotic, that you do it in this order. Start with the calcium, magnesium, then add in the multivitamin mineral blend, then the cod liver oil, then the probiotic, and then the last one would be the cod liver oil. The reason I mentioned cod liver oil being the last is that you want to try to avoid adding everything at one time and trying to space things out, at least every 24 to 48 hours, and particularly for kids who are real sensitive to medications or supplements. Of everything on this list, even including the probiotic, if a child was going to react, and usually if they reacted, it manifests sometimes as hyperactivity, maybe a little bit irritability, more times than not, and it doesn't occur that often, but it can occur. It's a cod liver oil. Okay, sometimes the cod liver oil, they'll put flavoring into it. Okay, whether it's a lemon flavor or a strawberry flavor to make it taste good. Otherwise, the supplement itself, cod liver oil, is not real tasty. some kids can have a sensitivity to it. So what you're trying to do, at least initially, is isolate out any potential problems that might occur with a supplement. Most of the time, supplement introduction is just fine, but again, it's that whole process of being methodical in your approach. Now, I talk a lot about New Beginnings Nutritionals. They're a great company. They were started by parents with special needs kids. There's certain people who work for New Beginnings that actually have kids who've recovered. And I highly recommend you download a copy of their product catalog. You can actually get a book catalog, or you can download as a PDF to your desktop. So it's definitely worthwhile having the latest edition. I also talked about the starter packets that I prefer in Module 1 lecture. So let's just review those real quickly. This is my personal preference. This is the combination of Spectrum Mate, which is a multivitamin, mineral, antioxidant. You can either get it as a powder or capsules. We've got the cod liver oil, and then we have the calcium and magnesium chewable. So if your child can swallow capsules, then get the capsule option. If they can't, then you can just do the powdered version. Okay, so and they give recommendations right here. So you have a copy of these slides. So the order of introduction, okay, let's go over that again real quick. Of those supplements that I just showed you, I personally would start with calcium, magnesium, or an equivalent supplement if you're using another company. Spectrum Mate or some equivalent, so that's the multivitamin, multimineral, and then cod liver oil would be last. If you started a probiotic, then it would go in between number 2 and 3. Separating supplements every 24 to 48 hours to just, again, determine if the supplement is tolerated or not. All right, so what about some supplement rules? And this is just general information about combining supplements, interactions, etc. The dosage recommendations that are provided for the vast majority of supplements, whether it's coming from a doctor, whether it's coming from a website like New Beginnings, are not toxic and they're not dangerous. At least in my experience, I've never seen a toxicity ever occur from a vitamin or mineral that we prescribed. Now, every child is different. Okay, so your child can be different than your friends or somebody else you might be corresponding with online. So there really are no two children alike, but there are certain therapies that many children respond to in a positive way with high percentages. But you have to realize that if this is not a perfect system, and you may have to try different supplement products to find that right combination that's the right combination for your child. Foundational supplements are absolutely essential for long-term biomedical success. Just like a healthy diet, you can't get very far in any kind of health approach if the diet is lousy. Now, I realize that getting some kids to take supplements can be a challenge. Some kids are easier than others. You're just going to have to work that out with your child to figure out what kind of challenges you have. Maybe, hopefully, not many. The other thing is liquid supplements are not always better. Okay, just because it's a liquid doesn't mean that it is better absorbed. Sometimes some of the best supplements are powder or tablets, but a liquid supplement may make it more convenient from a dosing standpoint, but it doesn't always mean it's better. And unfortunately, not everything comes in a gummy vitamin either. Here's that Oral Flow cup. This can actually be ordered online. You can go to oralflow.com. And again, it's that process of trying to get your kids to take capsules or tablets or, as soon as possible. Taste is always going to be an issue. So the sooner they can start swallowing capsules, the better. The other thing is keep in mind is that supplements really need to be treated as with the same intensity or dedication as a medication. If your child had an infection, was prescribed an antibiotic, you're going to make sure that they get every dose, or they had asthma, or they had diabetes, for example. You're going to make sure they get their medication. Sometimes people take on an attitude, oh, it's just a supplement, so we can kind of be, lax about it. You're not going to get consistent results. And that's just it. Consistency is what's most important. It's the consistency over time. There may be some days that you might miss a dose or two of a supplement. And, that's not the end of the world. It's not life-threatening. But you want to try to minimize effective. And so going in with a dedication that you're going to really, really work hard to give your child supplements consistently is critical. Understanding that there may be certain days that one or two doses may be missed here and there. But again, you pick up the next day and you keep moving forward. Also, there often is a sense among people that they got to keep jumping to a new supplement, that somehow the grass is going to be greener with another supplement, or they heard about some other type of product that people are raving about. The reality is when you start working with companies like New Beginnings and the products that they carry, you're working with high-end companies, professional line companies. The major, there really isn't a huge significant difference between a high-end multivitamin mineral antioxidant amongst different professional line companies. And that's just the truth. So that's why I've always liked working with New Beginnings, because they have high-end quality products. Also, they have a support staff that is supportive to you as a parent. They've been there. And they've been doing these things for many years. No amount of supplements, and I even tell adults that I work with too, no amount of supplements will overcome a lousy diet. And that's, what ends up happening is people have a lousy diet, they just waste money on supplements. There's an article in Module 2 by Lori Knowles. She's a mom with a recovered child, called Getting Children to Take Supplements. Okay, one of the things that she highly recommends is trying to avoid hiding supplements in food. That doesn't mean that you wouldn't give supplements in food, but if your child has a favorite food and you're stuffing a bunch of supplements in there and then trying to ignore that you did that, that could be a problem. And this is where the article goes in trying to give some tips and suggestions on how to get kids to take supplements effectively. She does a nice job on laying that out in that handout. Now, what about some supplement rules as far as which supplements can be mixed together and maybe which ones you want to separate? There's not too many. Generally, calcium taken at the same time is not recommended. So ideally, you want to separate by a few hours. And that just has to do with the absorption of zinc. Okay, so calcium and zinc at the same time, try and separate by a few hours. Most kids on the spectrum are not taking copper. Now, occasionally, copper may be suggested based on a lab test. You want to take zinc and copper if they're being given with a small amount of food, because more so with zinc, zinc on an empty stomach will usually cause nausea. But also zinc and copper together can compete for absorption. So those should be separated by a couple hours if the copper is being given. And honestly, most of the time, your kids aren't getting copper. Probiotics with digestive enzymes, this is a questionable issue. I mean, when we eat food, we're releasing digestive enzymes and acid in the stomach, and we're getting good bacteria that comes through our food. So whether it makes a difference, difficult to say. I would say, if at all possible, if you can separate probiotics from digestive enzymes, then I would do it. If logistically trying to schedule this all out in your busy day and in your child's busy day and it just can't happen, then I would just move forward. My feeling is it's better to get supplements into your kids that you've purchased for the purpose of helping their health than sit on the kitchen counter because you can't quite figure out how to get them in based on an ideal schedule. Probiotics with antimicrobial botanicals, those should be separated. Okay, so grapefruit seed extract, oil of oregano, olive extract, I would recommend separating by a couple hours. The reality is most supplements can be mixed in juice or food unless otherwise indicated based on the packaging. And a lot of that comes down to the fact, again, that we naturally get vitamins and minerals through our food anyway, coming together. So there's a lot of variables that can happen with these biomedical programs, but my feeling is try not to lose the forest through the trees, meaning, keep your supplement programs focused and simplified. It can become incredibly challenging if you start adding in a lot more supplements sometimes without taking things away. And I've seen parents who have their kids on 30 to 40 different supplement products. I mean, their entire day is based on trying to get their kids to take supplements. And you get to a certain point, with questionable results, how much more improvement are you really getting? Okay. The other thing about combining supplements, let's say, for example, you have been using calcium with zinc, or maybe you've been mixing an enzyme with a probiotic. Does it mean that there's some type of toxic reaction or dangerous reaction that has occurred? No, that's never happened in my experience. Yeah, maybe you minimized or depleted some of the absorption of zinc. Okay, how much? Hard to say. 20%? Maybe you altered the probiotic a little bit. Most probiotics are 20 to 25 billion organisms. Maybe you knocked a couple million out of the way. That's a very small amount compared to the amount you're actually getting. So you just pick up the next day and move forward. Remember, it's what happens over time and the consistency over time as opposed to what's happening at that one specific dose. What about some helpful hints? Let's go through a few things here with regards to general information about how to give supplements. Okay, so if a supplement instruction states, dose something 3 times per day, and for whatever reason you keep missing the middle of the day dose, or their child's at school and the school doesn't quite understand what you're doing, then it's okay to adjust how to dose those things in most cases, and just dose things twice a day. And I've commonly done this with parents in my practice where they say, I can't get that vitamin at lunchtime. I just keep forgetting, or something else comes up. And I say, okay, let's just split the difference, and we'll give a little bit more in the morning, and we'll give a little bit more in the afternoon. Just do it twice a day, make it easier. Now that works okay for some things. When it comes to things like antimicrobial and anti-candida, antibacterial remedies, you're usually going to get a better effect if things are spread out at least 3 times a day, no less than twice a day. But again, it's what's ideal and then what is realistic in your particular circumstance. Also remember, if you're getting a list of supplements, 5 or 6 things, my recommendation is to add 1 new supplement every 24 to 48 hours and observe how your child reacts. It's okay and perfectly acceptable to start slow and low and then build up, okay, over time. As I mentioned before, most multivitamins and minerals can be mixed together, and these things can also be mixed in a wide variety of food. Maybe it's, baby food or a fruit puree, some type of tart juice tends to work pretty well. Fruit smoothies work well too. One of the things about vitamins, though, as opposed to minerals, you want to avoid vitamins being given in hot food or cooking. Okay, you don't want to add vitamins to something that you're cooking because it can alter the structure. Now, minerals generally are fine cooked, or they can be mixed into baked goods as well. Vitamins and botanicals can't. Okay, so minerals are fine, but vitamins and botanicals, you shouldn't cook with them. or you shouldn't add those to really hot foods. Now, mineral powders can also be added to things like baking mixes or mixed in fruit purees to kind of hide that chalkiness. And that tends to happen a lot with things like calcium. Calcium can tend to be very chalky. So a way to get it into your child is mix it again in some kind of baking mix or a fruit puree of some sort. Also, minerals can be added to drinks. Just like the vitamins, they can be mixed in juices too. Now, ionic minerals, and New Beginnings has a couple different ones. I'll show you here. I'll show you an example here in a sec. These tend to be very highly absorbed, okay, and so they can even be useful in bypass a child who really has an unhealthy digestive system. Also, because they're ionic, they don't have to go through multiple steps to be metabolized. So they're usually easy to give through water or some type of diluted juice. However, some ionic minerals can have a bit of a salty taste. Now, New Beginnings has a couple, these are just examples, and they have more than this. The chelate mate is a combination multi-mineral. It's an ionic mineral. And liquid magnesium, they also have a liquid calcium too. They're definitely salty tasting. So take that into account when using these, because some kids may object to the salty taste. They normally, though, mix really pretty well in some type of stronger type of juice, like a grape juice or a cranberry juice, for example. Also, they can be mixed in other types of foods like soups or sauces, sometimes mixed in rice is a good way to give those minerals too. Well, what about some of the botanicals? This is where it gets a little tricky because botanical remedies by nature, these plant-based remedies, sometimes they don't taste good. And even to adults, they don't like taking sometimes. And it can get a little bit tricky. Now, this is where, again, trying to get your kids to swallow capsules and tablets is helpful. There are a few unique things with regards to some of the botanical remedies we'll talk about as the course progresses. Oregano oil, grapefruit seed extract, something called medium chain triglyceride, which comes from coconut, olive leaf extract. They have some unique recommendations regarding how they're administered. Now, MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride, is relatively tasteless, so it can pretty much be mixed in anything, and it will, tend to be tolerated just fine. But again, like in all botanicals, you don't want to add to anything really hot or cook with it. The best choices for kids who don't swallow pills, okay, from a antimicrobial botanical standpoint, MCT oil, because it's tasteless. There's a product called Alamax that New Beginnings has. This is a garlic extract. That also works well. Biocidin is one of my favorites. I'll talk about biocidin when we get into the yeast treatment and bacteria treatment portions of the course. It's a combination remedy. It comes in a capsule and liquid. And actually the liquid tastes fine for the most part. So, and it's really, actually an overall really effective remedy. GSE is grapefruit seed extract. This one has a kick to it. The one that New Beginnings carries is from a company called Nutrabiotic. And it's a fantastic product. Matter of fact, when I look at comprehensive digestive stool tests of kids, almost universally, the remedy that shows up high on the test, that when it's being tested against a yeast or bacteria, the one that always shows up positive, being most effective, is grapefruit seed extract. But it definitely can have a tart taste to it, so that usually needs to be mixed in some type of juice. Now, the garlic extract of Alamax, for the most part, mixing it in some water, mixing a little bit of juice will help to dissipate the garlic taste. It's not too strong. The grapefruit seed extract, you definitely got to mix that. But it's best mixed in some citrus juice, orange, lemon juice. You could even do it in grapefruit juice too. may or may not need some stevia. Now, stevia is a natural sweetener. The thing about stevia you got to watch for is stevia can have a strong taste too. I actually think stevia myself, it tastes like NutraSweet. So, you know, 1 drop might be enough, 3 drops might be too much. So you just kind of have to see. You usually can get stevia at any health food store. Remember, the grape seed extract is the one remedy that you want to avoid administering straight in the mouth. It's very strong, and it can even cause a little bit of stinging in the mouth too. Best mixed in some type of citrus juice. Another remedy that's part of this package of remedies we'll talk about for yeast is something called uva ursi. Now, it's best, honestly, it's best swallowed. It does okay in some kind of sauces, things like pear sauce, apple, or cinnamon. But it's not the best tasting botanical. And then there are other types of things, oregano oil, golden seal, olive leaf extract. These are kind of difficult. These are difficult to get into most kids who can't swallow pills. Well, we talked about probiotics, and ideally probiotics, again, should be separated from these antimicrobial remedies. At least an hour and a half, 2 hours or so is fine. I usually have people take probiotics at night, so it eliminates the whole complexity of trying to give it through the day, maybe when the child is using some of the botanical remedies to treat yeast or bacteria. Keep thinking about probiotics, keep in a cool place. You can place it in cool food, not hot food, water, or even dilute juice. Okay. So those are some, general suggestions. The reality is with these supplements, again, it's the consistency over time, and then just figuring out strategies to get your kids to take the supplements. Let's talk about developing an action plan. So you're just starting off, you're new to this whole approach, perhaps you're coming back to the fold here, you've done some things in the past. These are some step 1, step 2, step 3 suggestions. So first off, I recommend getting a copy of the New Beginnings Nutritional Product Catalog. Whether you get it in the book form or you download it as a PDF to your desktop, you want to have a catalog. Also, reading my ebook called Autism, The Road to Recovery. This will give you some solid foundation on the whole 4-pillar approach that we talked about in Module 1, and also go through some different case studies of different kids from my practice that may match up, or at least part of their presentation may match up with your child. Talked about the handout by Lori Knowles called Getting Children to Take Supplements. That's key, particularly if you know that your kid's going to be challenging, and got to have some strategies. Okay, so what you're trying to do is arm yourself with information up front so you can move through these different steps confidently, and then also know where to access information if you need assistance. The handout that I created, Suggestions for Implementing a Gluten Casein-Free Diet, is actually very good. And it's based on this idea of removing dairy first and then starting to remove gluten as time goes on. And then as you're working on diet, this is where you would order your starter supplements. Okay, the starter supplements I mentioned here, or if you're using another company, most supplement companies who support the autism community will have their own starter supplements, and they're relatively similar. Let's take a look at this document called Suggestions for Implementing a Gluten Casein-Free Diet. This book by Lisa Lewis, Special Diets for Special Kids, is really good. And it's really helpful, particularly as a new parent, learning about some of the different ideas and recipes and whatnot on how to implement a gluten casein-free diet. The general overview is this. The first step, and I always feel that it's important to try to remove the dairy first. Again, because of the percentages that are shown, 65 to 70% of the kids tend to be more dairy reactive than gluten reactive. Also, it's generally easier to identify dairy foods versus gluten foods, which might be hidden in something else. So again, in the beginning of this presentation, I also talked about those remedies that tend to be quick responders, meaning they tend to give quick feedback within 1 to 2 to 3 weeks. Dairy is certainly one of those. I look back at my practice for the past many years and I realized that when parents tell me that their child had positive responses to removing dairy and gluten, it was almost, I'm going to say almost, a very high percentage of the time, it was the dairy that gave the real profound effect, at least initially. So during those first, 2 to 3 weeks or so, you're starting to remove dairy products. Also, soy is something that is important to try to remove as well. Now, a lot of kids aren't eating soy unless they're eating soy protein powder, for example. They might be eating some soy, but soy does have a chemical similarity to dairy, so it's worth trying to remove the soy as well. Now, I mentioned that do this for at least 3 weeks. Some kids, you may be able to get them off of dairy foods within a week, sometimes a half a week. I mean, it just depends. But giving yourself a little bit of time to work this out, on average, about 3 weeks. And plus, also, if you give yourself a little bit of time too, as you're starting to remove the dairy, it gives you time to start researching what you're going to start to do with regards to the gluten. So the second phase is just that, removing gluten. So week 1, week 2, week 3 kind of breaks down to week 1, you start trying to remove and change up breakfast. So introducing, 5 new gluten-free type foods for breakfast. And you do that over the first week. Then you move into the second week, same kind of thing for lunch. And then third week is the same kind of approach for dinner. And then eventually you get to snack foods. So by the time over a month's period of time of gluten removal, you've changed up breakfast, lunch, dinner, as well as snacks. So it's not so overwhelming to try to do it all at once. The step 2 aspect of your autism action plan is at about 5 to 7 days, if this was all panning out or playing out exactly as I outlined. About 5 to 7 days into the dairy removal, this is where you can start to implement your starter supplements. And this is what I've had parents do in my practice for years. Of the list that I gave you, the calcium, magnesium, the Spectrum Mate multivitamin mineral, and the cod liver oil, I will have people start the calcium and magnesium first. And one reason for that is, again, the main calcium source for kids most of the time is the dairy. And so shortly after removing dairy, we want to get them started to take in calcium. It will take 5 days, 7, 8 days or so to implement the initial supplements. Okay, so that tends to stretch out. And by the time all is said and done, you go through all this, you're at about the 3-week mark, which we had mentioned. So once the supplements have been started, and you're now sort of nearing the end of this initial dairy or the dairy removal phase, now you start moving into the gluten products, as we just mentioned, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. That's where you can start using the suggestions, the handout we just talked about, suggestions for implementing a gluten casein-free diet, so that in probably about a 6-week period of time, you've removed 2 of the major food offenders that are seen in autism, dairy and gluten. At the same time, in that time frame, you've incorporated some foundational remedies. One of the other things that I think is critical for you as a parent stepping into this is journaling. And what I mean by journaling is it's not all just about writing down your feelings, which I think can be important, but it's keeping notes about your observations of your child's changes. So, if you start thinking about major things, the eye contact, the awareness, are they less anxious? Are they sleeping better? What are you observing? And it's important to look back on those journal notes too as time goes on to see where they were and where they've come to. Also, keep a spreadsheet of dietary changes, supplements. Now, maybe this is nothing more than just making notes on a calendar. Or you can maybe I've had parents who make up a spreadsheet on their computer. I'm forgetting the template now, either Mac or a PC, but there's those software programs that you can do spreadsheets on. And writing down your observations, okay? What are the dates of a new therapy? What was the date that you started removing dairy? What was the date that you started removing gluten? What was the date that you started Spectrum Mate? What was the date that you stopped a supplement or stopped a medication? And then try and correlate some type of positive, or hopefully not, some negative response. These are notes that are also important for you to share back with your doctor. So when you go back to your personal doctor to say, okay, this is what I've done over the last 4 to 6 weeks, it's easier to isolate a problem. I just had a consult recently with a family that had started all of these supplements that I just mentioned, and they did it in the order that I recommended, and sure enough, their child got hyper and irritable after the cod liver oil. Well, it was really pretty easy to isolate out, because they had gone step by step, and then all of a sudden, their child reacts, again, the way I just described to the cod liver oil. It's like, well, okay, let's take that out as the one variable, and the behavior improved. So if they had just started everything at once, well, it's more challenging that way. Also, recognizing patterns of behavior, okay? Not everything, and as I just mentioned this in the lecture for Module 1, not everything is a biomedical problem. Not everything is a food dye reaction. Not everything is a gluten problem. Not everything is a yeast issue. Sometimes it could just be situational behavioral changes that are being seen during the day of a child at school, for example, or in a therapy session. Or does it occur at a certain time of the day? I had a child once who had meltdowns after school every day, and it was determined, basically what happened was, it was found out that the child wasn't eating their lunch at school, and the teachers weren't making sure that they had his mid-morning snack. So by the time he came home in the afternoon, he was hypoglycemic. He had such low blood sugar, he was irritable and agitated, but because the child couldn't talk, he just had these tantrums, and things settled down once he finally got something to eat. One interesting note about that particular case, that behavior didn't occur on the weekends or on holidays off from school. It only happened on school days. Okay, step 3 is lab testing. This is where you now start to go into trying to identify underlying biological problems. I break things down between blood testing or traditional blood testing, which means a blood draw, and non-blood testing. My personal feeling and experience is you can get a lot done with kids on the spectrum in the initial phases by doing testing that doesn't require blood draws. It doesn't mean that a blood draw may not be necessary at some point, but dietary intervention, initial implementation of supplements, and baseline testing, like the organic acids test, etc., will get you to where you need to go. Okay. The priority test for me, and it has been this way for years, is the organic acids test from Great Plains Laboratory. This is a urine test. It's generally easy to collect. It can be shipped, the test kit can be shipped all over the world. And as you're going to find out next week, when we go into interpreting the organic acid test, why I feel this way is because of the information you can get from it. It is a critical test. I wouldn't do without it. In fact, if of the 5 tests that you see listed here, if you can only afford to do one thing in the beginning, testing-wise, my personal preference would be to opt for the organic acids test. The others are nice add-ons, if you can do it. A comprehensive digestive stool analysis would be great to get. Okay, it's a nice complement to the organic acids test. But it's not an absolute if money is a problem or you've got to really prioritize. If we can, I like to get a food sensitivity test because in most kids it's more than just a dairy or gluten sensitivity. Sometimes there can be other foods at play. The nice thing about the food IgG test, and all of these tests, by the way, are from Great Plains. The food IgG is a blood spot, which means it's a finger prick test that can be done at home. It doesn't require blood. I like this as an entry-level test for heavy metal assessment. It doesn't have to be done right up front. Okay, it could always come later if finances are an issue. And it is a good screening test for heavy metal exposure. It also gives some insight into certain mineral imbalances. The urinary peptide test is a test that looks at the peptides, which we talked about again in the lecture of Module 1. And this could be useful to get a baseline, to see what kind of peptide reactions are occurring. Or perhaps maybe you're somebody that just wants a test up front before starting the diet. There's certain circumstances where people want to have as much data up front. It's not an absolute. Okay, the urinary peptide test is not an absolute test to have in order to initiate a gluten casein-free diet. I've get asked the question a lot about should I or should I do, not do the urinary peptide test, or should I just start the diet? And I said, look, the reality in food sensitivity testing, particularly gluten and casein with kids on the spectrum, is the real test is, do they get benefit when the food's removed? Because sometimes the tests, although they're very good tests, sometimes they can be inconclusive in certain circumstances. So just taking the approach of, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and move through the gluten casein-free diet for minimally 3 months and see what kind of response I get, in my experience, has not only been perfectly safe, but has been very reasonable and shown great benefit for many kids. So hopefully that helps. Now, what about access to these tests? If you live within the United States, okay, coming from a company like Great Plains, and different labs are different, so I'm really looking at from Great Plains standpoint, you can order the test kits, but you will need to have a physician's signature for the samples to be processed. Now, you can have your personal physician's office order the labs for you. All they have to do is contact Great Plains and set themselves up as an account. It's not hard to do. There are insurance payment options available through Great Plains through some of the tests, but again, it depends on your insurance. So the best thing to do is to contact Great Plains directly for more information about your particular insurance. There's another option, and that is ordering these labs through a website called labtestsplus.com. Now, labtestsplus.com is a website that we have set up that has contracts with many of the different labs, including Great Plains, where you have access to the labs that I just mentioned: the oat, the organic acid, the comprehensive stool, the food IgG, the hair, the urinary peptide, and others. What happens when labs are ordered through LabTestPlus is the kits are sent to you, and when the results are received, I look at the lab results and I do a written review of those findings and then give what's called action step suggestions based on the relative markers or the relevant markers. Now, one thing about LabTestPlus is that there is no insurance option for payment through labs ordered through LabTestPlus. If you want insurance or the potential for insurance reimbursement, then you've got to work through your personal physician to have that done. One of the other things about LabTestPlus that we set up is we set up this which test section. And essentially what this is for is if you have questions about which test maybe to order, maybe some of the other tests that are on the menu other than what I've mentioned. You can go to the which test section and submit your question. You can type in your question and say, this is my child's situation, and what test might be recommended based on the information I'm providing you. And we can give you feedback on that. All right, what about test access options if you live outside the United States? Well, normally you can order lab testing from Great Plains Lab on your own if you live outside the US, and you can have those labs processed by just you ordering it and submitting it. Okay. Now, at the time of this recording, that is what's known to be true. Okay, I can't state going forward that perhaps their policy may change or other factors may come into play. So this is where you have to do your due diligence in contacting Great Plains directly when ordering lab tests to not only determine pricing and shipping, the shipping charges, because whatever country there can be different shipping charges, but also there can be customs issues that might come up based on your country. Now, whether Great Plains has all the information on customs, probably not, but they've got experience with certain countries. But get your information up front. Typically, again, at the time of this recording, people outside the US can order labs from Great Plains Laboratory and have it processed without getting a signature. But make sure you contact them for more information. Now, people outside the US also have an option to order labs, again, through labtestplus.com, which I had just gone through. So if you're interested in the labtestplus.com option, go to the website, take a look at the menu list. And if you have any questions, you can email. One of the things about the organic acid test, and I just want to point out when we go through this, is I wrote up a document called 10 Reasons Every Individual with Special Needs Diagnosis Should Do a Urinary Organic Acid Test. And it breaks down into 10 major categories. One is it evaluates for fungal toxins and the different aspects of what candida toxicity can do. Two is it evaluates for specific markers related to Clostridia bacteria that are known to interfere with brain chemistry that can lead to aggression and self-injurious behavior, sleeping problems, etc. Also, that information helps you to prioritize where the intervention should come in. If you've got a Clostridia problem, it needs to be dealt with, in my experience. We just can't assume everything is from yeast. It evaluates for oxalates. Oxalates can cause mineral imbalances in the body and can create behavioral problems for some kids. It looks at mitochondrial imbalances. Mitochondria are these energy factories in our cells that help to improve energy metabolism. Many kids have underlying mitochondrial imbalances. It looks for neurochemical imbalances that can affect attention and behavior as well. It looks at folate metabolism, which is another important component with regards to the methylation cycle, which we'll get into later in the course. It looks at certain nutrients, B6 and vitamin C and glutathione. Okay, oftentimes markers that are imbalanced could indicate a glutathione problem. And glutathione is very important as a very powerful antioxidant that kids with special needs sometimes need. So a lot of things come back from this test that you can get information about. So to summarize, okay, the action steps, the action plan is moving through the dietary phase, as we had just mentioned, starting with dairy and then moving into gluten, and then incorporating the starter supplements as you start to create the foundation for supplement intervention, and then starting to work through some of the basic testing. And there's nothing wrong with just starting with the organic acids test and then working based on the information on that, which I'm going to share with you over the next couple of modules. And then incorporating methyl B12 therapy. Okay, whether it's through a nasal spray, whether it's through an injection, whether it's through another form. It becomes a critical piece of this initial phase of biomedical intervention of the 4 pillars because methylation plays such a central role in cognitive function, language, etc. So you also have, access to the Methyl B12 book, and we'll get to that information as well. Okay, so there's the Methyl B12 ebook. That is a guidebook on the implementation of methyl B12 intervention. Okay, so that is the information for Module 2. Module 3, as I mentioned, is how to interpret the organic acids test from Great Plains Lab. So we're going to go through that test section by section, talk about how to prioritize information, linking up certain behaviors that are related to certain markers on that test. You now have information about how to access that test, whether it's directly through Great Plains or your doctor or the labtestplus.com site. So if you have any questions about the material or about the website, etc., make sure to reach out to us. The email address is autismmastery@gmail.com. And thanks so much, and we'll see you in Module 3. Take care.